X-Men. Get it!
Behold, everyone, and welcome to Battle of the Atom! This is your weekly X-Men podcast where I, Zach Jenkins, and my co-host Adam Reck go through 3 X-Men stories, and we decide how they fare against every other X-Men story of all time. Adam, how are we doing today?
Behold, I am ready to Ragnarok. And I hope you are too, because this week we are talking about some of my personal favorite X-Men and New Mutant stories. And, I'm very biased about this. There's a lot of nostalgia here. So I'm really excited. And I'm really, really excited because we have a special guest straight from Asgard to help us do this. Do you want to tell them who's joining us today?
I mean, I can. It is the one, the only Elisabeth Allie from the Lightning and the Storm podcast. Elizabeth, how are we doing today?
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being on. It's going to be a real exciting thing. We figured if we're going to be talking about Thor stuff in Asgard, we might as well get the best experts we can.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, I appreciate your faith in me. I'm only a little bit afraid.
Oh, don't be afraid.
You'll survive the experience.
Yeah.
So
I got to ask before we get into the X-Men stuff, Elizabeth, what was your take on Thor Ragnarok? I think all 3 of us have seen it by now. So
yes.
What'd you think?
I loved it with a few reservations. Like Thor Ragnarok is so fun and it's so funny. And I love the way they kind of juiced it. It's like they have a lot of faith in Thor as a character. It didn't feel like a second sequel. It felt kind of like a new beginning, which was great. And it was so funny. And there were so many nods to comic book history in it. But it made me wish that there was a little bit more of the actual comics in it. But that's just my inner nerd.
Well, I can understand that.
Yeah, I can buy that.
How about you guys?
Oh, I loved it. I thought it was great. But I can see where you're coming from, especially having just done that huge recap that you guys did of the Simonson era. It's definitely not a literal product. So,
Yeah, and awesome. I mean, it was awesome. I mean, normally I don't believe there should be straight recap, straight adaptations of comics to movies because it's 2 different mediums. If you really want that, you can go read it. It still exists. So I do love what they did with it. Thor's haircut, I got used to it really fast. And, the relationship with him and Loki is always a highlight. And yeah, just all the jokes.
Yeah. I loved it.
For me, it was the impetus to, get off my reading list and say, okay, now I really have to just finish the Simonson Thor stuff. And I got through Cert War and I was like, okay, here's a good stopping point. I'm going to do some other things now. And it just fell off my list for a while. And the moment I got home from that movie, I was like, okay, and I'm going to load this back up and I'm going to read all of this. And I'm now down to, I think I saw it like 2 weeks ago and I have 5 issues of the Simonson run left, and I'm loving every second of it.
Nice. So you've gone through Frog Thor.
Yes.
One of the many high points.
Yeah, it's going to be important. And, obviously you've gone through all of it. Adam, what's your familiarity with the Walt Simonson Thor epic? I think epic's the right word.
Yeah, I started reading it earlier this year, but I didn't get up to Throg yet. So as soon as I finish that, I'll let you know. But I have been listening to the recaps on your podcast, Elizabeth, and they have been awesome. So thank you for doing that show.
Oh, I was just going to say full props to Miles because, that was his dream podcast. And I was very lucky to be taken along with him.
I mean, it was a lot of fun. It was a good time.
It's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
We're glad you guys did it.
However, the first story we have does not directly tie into the stuff that was going on in Simonson's Thor, but it's going to become very relevant to everything else on this list.
Yes.
This is X-Men and Alpha Flight numbers 1 and 2. It was written by Chris Claremont with pencils by Paul Smith, inks by Bob Wyack, and colors by Glynis Oliver. This is a kind of strange story for me. Like this is always collected with the Asgard War stuff, which if you haven't figured it out by this point in the podcast, we are covering Asgard War later. Like, come on, guys, come on. But this is always kind of an oddball for me. Now, I was never a big Alpha Flight guy, and having not really dug into the Asgard stuff until pretty recently, when I had first gone through this series, all of that was new to me. Adam, what was your relationship with any of the other non X-Men entities going in on this time?
I think this is probably a good point to mention that this book, and I'm holding it in my hands right now, which features X-Men and Alpha Flight and then the Asgardian Wars. This book was my introduction as a kid to both X-Men and New Mutants. So prior to this, I kind of knew that they existed, but I picked this up there used to be a comic book store in the Baltimore Inner Harbor Mall. And my parents bought this for me. I don't even know why. And this was my introduction to this world. So that's one of the reasons I had, think of it so fondly. But I mean, talk about not knowing what the heck is going on. Like, this is by itself, even knowing all the continuity, this is a weird story, right?
Oh yeah. That's a beautiful introduction in so many ways.
I feel a little teary. I'm getting a little teary.
For me, like, I still am a huge John Byrne fangirl. So I had read all of Alpha Flight and I had read all of X-Men, but I started like in 1989. So I never even, if I saw it, I didn't even recognize it because I was going through the back issues of the X-Men and the Alpha Flight. And a lot of the side series I kind of thought was a waste of my money because I was, so committed to filling in all of the back issues. But this actually does fill in some holes with my X-Men knowledge that I always wondered about. So I find it really fascinating now.
Yeah, this is such an odd thing for me because you bring in all of the X-Men, which they've got who's on the team: Wolverine, Shadowcat, Rogue, Colossus, Nightcrawler, and Rachel Summers at the time. You bring in all of Alpha Flight, and there's like 7 people on that. Then you bring in the Berserkers, who are a brand new team that have Madeline Pryor on it and a bunch of first time they've ever shown up, and I think the last time they've ever shown up characters.
Yeah.
who all get Nordic superpowers. It's very Adam, I don't know how this was your introduction to X-Men. You said, yes, this is something I would like to continue to spend my time with.
Well, I think anybody that's jumping into any point of X continuity, because everybody has one of these stories, is like, like, where did they jump in? And I think that one of the mystifying things about that is you're wondering, who the heck are these people? I remember glossing over this part a little bit more and rereading what we're going to talk about next repeatedly. But that's, I still read this over and over again, and it was still a pretty good introduction to who the Paul Smith era of the X-Men are. I think, his artwork throughout this is absolutely gorgeous. But it is just an interesting kind of existential quandary that Loki puts upon these characters. Because the basic premise is that, we've got normal super scientisty folks that are being flown around by Scott and Maddie, who then get transformed into these sort of superpowered giants who are capable of remaking the world into a better place. But to do it, there are sacrifices, and they're ultimately not willing to make them. So it's an interesting parable, all, in and of itself.
The first time I read it was probably 3 years ago, and I think it was for the first time I guested on Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men, and it was before I had read Thor. So it seemed really bizarre, like the costumes and things seemed really bizarre to me. And then reading it again for now, I'm like, oh yeah, they're dressed like Asgardians. Like, oh yeah. And Paul Smith gets that so well. Like he just does such a beautiful job, and he's my favorite artist for Madeline. You know, like he
Mhm.
created her to a degree, and this is the best story I feel you ever get. I mean, I love Inferno Madeline, but non crazy, just Madeline as a normal person and her and Scott as a functional couple. Like this is the most like story she ever gets.
Yeah, and you get the great moment of them finding out that Madeline is pregnant with Nathan Christopher Charles Dayspring Asgardian son Summers, which
Um,
Cable.
Wait, first of all, you get Charles Xavier outing Madeline's
Oh, what? Sure.
pregnancy
okay, yeah, so
without
that's
her consent. That is a no-no. And Professor Xavier is, as usual, a jerk.
A jerk. Always.
it's a jerk.
Well, really, let Madeline tell her husband. You know, their lives, their marriage was doomed at that moment. You know, old Professor X, he just has to come in and meddle.
Yeah, that wasn't great. I had forgotten that that's how they found out.
I'm glad you mentioned, though, that this is a really great Madeline-centric story. We've gotten a lot of flack from people since we did our Inferno episode, and Zach and I are not the biggest Inferno, fans. But I love Madeline Pryor, but one of the things I don't like about Inferno is that I feel like her character kind of gets assassinated in a lot of ways. So it's awesome to have this two-parter, which is mammoth. I mean, it's almost 100 pages long over 2 issues, and you get this gorgeous Paul Smith art, and Madeline really does get to, be the central character in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean,
Yep.
end of the day, it's Madeline's choice that really decides this whole thing. Her saying that no, Loki, who had given all these people their powers, I don't think we mentioned that. No, Loki, we're not going to give these sacrifices for this power. It's not worth it. And I think that's very important. It shows a lot of her character. It makes it a little rougher later down the line where she does say, oh, yeah, forget everyone else. I will let the world burn. But at this moment,
That's
It's a bit of a heel turn.
post-divorce Madeline, you know.
well, like
Yeah.
I just for the website just wrote up something for Mr. Sinister, which should be up by the time anyone's listening to this. In having to go through all the stuff she went through for Inferno, I was like, oh man, Madeline had it rough. Those were
Oh yeah.
those were some bad
Oh,
bad
yeah.
years for her.
No
Well,
kidding.
the hole this filled in for me is before she turns and they're all captured on Genosha. There's a scene of her in prison talking about how she used to be a healer and she used to have healing powers, and that used to
right.
drive me crazy. And I would go back through my back issues and I'd be like, "What is this?" And so reading this was this like 20 years later, this moment.
There it is.
Any
There it
editors
is.
listening, this is why the low asterisk is very important, and we all want it back and more frequently.
Yeah, please bring
I
those
don't
little
care
boxes
what
back.
the marketing data says. I want it back. But
No, I want
Yes.
it back too.
no, I think this is a
Um,
fun issue. I think in the grand scheme of things, there's some big things that happen. Like you find out that Madeline's pregnant, you get her experiencing, being superpowered and all that stuff, and you get that nice little extra relationship between Scott and Rachel that you don't
mhm.
get enough of in the initial X-Men run. So I think all of that is a good part of it. I do think the downsides are it's very busy. Like, I don't think Alpha Flight is all that important in this crossover. No offense to any Alpha Flight fans we have out there, but they feel like they exist and they're around to have some more magical, spiritual characters to deal with the sacrifice side of it. But I
Mhm.
don't know how much they add to this story.
That's fair.
Yeah, in a way, it's like Heather's story is kind of a weak parallel to Madeline's, where she just kind of
Mhm.
gets her heart's desire and she's like, oh, I'm a leader now. I'm not kind of extraneous, but she's still a little bit extraneous to
Yeah.
the story.
Yeah, yeah. Do we want to think about where we would rank this?
So I'm gonna say it's wherever this is, Asgardian War is going higher than it. That's what I do know.
Yeah,
I
I mean, this is the catalyst for that, but it's certainly not. I don't hold this in as high esteem as the other book, which you'll hear me go absolutely bananas for in a moment. So, I'm looking towards like top 15 though. I mean,
is it? It's. I don't think this is better than Examinations, because Examinations is
Okay.
the best part of that entire X Factor run. I don't think this gets that. Where I would look, I think it's probably better than. I know it's definitely better than the Tomorrow People, the first run or the first arc of Ultimate X-Men.
Mhm.
I definitely don't think it's better than Examinations. I don't think it's better than the first arc of Peter David's X Factor Investigations either. So I think to me, it's somewhere
So we're going.
between the Tomorrow People and Giant Size X-Men #1. Elizabeth, what are
Yeah,
your
the
thoughts on
one.
this?
I
Yeah,
would,
you have a
I
copy of the list.
would, yeah, I would definitely put it above Excalibur Mojo Mayhem.
Okay, I
Okay.
think that's fair.
And with Messiah War, I don't know if I've read it or if I'm blanking on it. Which one is Messiah War?
It's the one where X-Force goes into the future where Cable is with Baby Hope and they fight Strife. It's from like
Oh, yeah.
2008, 2008, I think. So
I
Yes.
think this is better than that.
I think that's fair. I can put it there.
Yep. That's right before I started reading X-Men again. But I've read around there, and I would agree. This is better. This is like some beautiful, weird, three-headed puppy. Like it's so bizarre, but it's still adorable.
Yeah. I would love to put it above Executioner's Song, and I love Executioner's Song, so
Here,
I'm feel like it's slowly edging
so
up.
you like Executioner's Song more than I do. So I'm fine.
Yes.
I am fine with having it bump there with your permission, of course.
Okay.
I
So
would say Giant Size is probably overall a stronger thing. Like I'll tell you, every time I read this story, it feels a bit disjointed to me. It feels a
mhm,
bit extraneous. There's some important things that end up happening in it, but they aren't the core of the story. They aren't the big running themes in the story. They're things that happen during it. So
okay. I'm
I would
fine
say
with it
that.
there.
Elizabeth,
You
does
okay
that
with
work
that,
with you?
Ethan?
All right. So what are we saying between Giant Size X-Men and Executioner's Song?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I totally agree with that actually. Because I
All
hate
right.
Perfect.
Stripe.
Stripe is the worst.
he's so no. Actually, I love how much I hate him. Like you're just like wah wah.
All right.
Oh man.
So that would
One
put
down.
X-Men and Alpha Flight Volume 1, because apparently there is a sequel to this that came out in the mid 90s, written and drawn by John Cassaday, that I had never heard of until like
I didn't know either. You just told me that before the
Really?
show.
yeah.
Is it an actual
I
sequel?
mean, it's 2 issues, and I think the cover says something about being a sequel or a return or blast from the past. That's what it says on it.
Okay.
Mhm.
Go check that out.
Yep. So, but that's not what we're talking about because we all just found out that existed in the last hour and have yet to read it.
Sure.
Yeah. Let's get to the important stuff,
Yeah,
Zach.
let's
Okay.
get to Asgardian War. What I'd like Elizabeth to do, if she wouldn't mind, is provide context. What was Asgard going through at this time? Because this is in an incredibly specific point in continuity.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so much has happened. Asgard has banded together. Loki, Odin, and Thor finally teamed up to destroy Surtur in the Surt War, and in beating Surtur, Odin is gone. He's not exactly dead, but he's gone and he's not coming back, which has left a huge power vacuum, which Loki had originally wanted to take advantage of. He in X-Men and Alpha Flight #1, he was basically talking to the Asgardian gods, being like, "Hey, I was pretty good in Surt War. You should give me my heart's desire." And that was kind of the framework that X-Men and Alpha Flight was against. He was offering them these wonderful gifts, and in exchange, he was hoping to become, the next ruler of Asgard. They defied him. So Surtur's gone, everyone's gone, and Thor has now taken all of the Asgardians and the Anhariar and taken them down into Hell to defeat Hela because she has these innocent mortal souls that she shouldn't have. So basically everyone in Asgard who has any sort of power is down in hell. They can't be reached. Loki is mad at the X-Men for blowing his chance of greater godhood, and he is looking for a loophole to get his revenge.
Nice.
Yeah. So that happens, and that's a great recap. It's even better in comic form, so people need to pick that stuff up.
Totally.
Oh, so that happens, and in the X-Men world, the New Mutants have just gotten Karma back from the Shadow King. She's put on some weight thanks to him.
Such an unfortunate storyline.
Yeah,
I don't.
they.
It's one of the weakest parts of this book.
Yeah,
It really hasn't aged well.
No.
The only thing that saves this is that this is her journey, and I don't want to spoil it right now, precisely mirrors Baldur's journey in Nornheim, like to the minute. Like there's some sort of spiritual rehab boot camp they have in Nornheim, and that part is cool. But the fat shaming is not cool.
That's not great. But you're bringing up something that I absolutely love. So I'd read this story a ton of times before, because this is a pretty classic X-Men story. Yes. However, I had not read it after I had read all the stuff in Simonson's Thor. So there was a lot of stuff I had missed on the first run. Going back through this with the context of Simonson's Thor epic, oh my gosh, it checked all my boxes. This is great, because it starts out the New Mutants get captured by the Enchantress, because at the end of the Alpha Flight series, Loki was given really just one stipulation. He couldn't hurt the X-Men.
Mm-hmm.
However, he had no problem with the Enchantress hurting the New Mutants. That was a nice little loophole that the Prince of Lies was all about.
Well, and also he wanted Aurora to be his queen. He spied her on Midgard and had a little crush on her and thought, hey, Thor's gone. She used to wield, the thunder and the lightning. I can bring her up and install her as my new figurehead.
Exactly. So he gets this plan to bring them up, and what happens is everyone gets separated, and they all go on their own little hero's journeys. So as we said, Karma gets sent into the desert and essentially does Baldur the Brave's entire first arc in Thor, which is really cool. Magic becomes the Enchantress's slave for a little bit and kind of just learns all of her spells. Magma becomes one of the fairies, which is another callback to an arc in Simonson's Thor. Sunspot just becomes a warrior and loves it. Wolfsbane falls in love with Prince Himari, who's a wolf guy. Cypher becomes a slave. Warlock bats out of hell. And Cannonball hangs out with some dwarves. Then Danny Moonstar becomes a Valkyrie. That's pretty important. That's the big thing. I was not supposed to forget that one.
Yeah. Well, and that is a really good encapsulation of why just the New Mutants side of this alone is so vital. To if you're a New Mutants fan, you can't skip this. It might be a special edition or whatever, but it is so integral to where these characters go for the rest of their series. So, there's such an expansive amount of time that is spent in these locations, and these characters get to age a little bit. They get to kind of really live here, so that later on, when they're asked whether they want to stay or leave, that's an actual decision that they have to make, and we believe it. Because each of the adventures that they go on are really great and are very engaging.
Right.
Yeah. Each person either gets their heart's desire, or with Magma, they change so fundamentally they fear they can't go back to Earth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The creative team on this, and to mention, that is written by Chris Claremont with pencils by Art Adams.
My boy Art Adams.
Colors on the New Mutant special by Christy Sheely, and on the X-Men one, Petra Scosi, and inks on the New Mutants special by Terry Austin, and on the X-Men annual by Alan Gordon, Art Adams, and Mike Mignola. I just mispronounced his name.
Mignola.
How did I do
Mignola.
that? Yeah,
Mignola.
I did not know he did inks on that. That's exciting.
You know?
Yeah, he did a lot of for Marvel, and from what I understand, he felt bad about that. That like he didn't think he was a good inker. I'm just drawing from an interview that I heard of him, and then he felt kind of guilty about that, which is crazy that Mignola was ever not great, but at one point he maybe wasn't? Question mark.
If he wasn't great, it was in a different book than this one because everything looks gorgeous in this. The art in these two books it's superb. This is what I think of when I think of Art Adams.
Absolutely. I miss when he would do the annuals. He did it every year for a
Mhm.
couple of years, and it was so great. And they never felt like extras or filler or like just some extra bucks they were trying to make. Like and you're right, they're real stories that affect the characters.
Well, and Zach, you know that I am a huge Art Adams fan. He's like really one of my favorite artists of any comic book, whatever. But this to me, and along with some of the other annual work, but this book in particular to me is his definitive work. The whole page count I think is around 114
Yeah, this is
pages,
big.
something like that. It is it's a complete mini series in over the course of 2 specials, and every single page is killer. I go back to this so often it's ridiculous. So even just from the artistic standpoint, not the story, which I also absolutely love, I think it's a classic. And we haven't even gotten into really the X-Men
Oh, you
half
mean
of
the part
this,
where Storm becomes
because
Thor? And it feels
the
right.
goddess of thunder.
Nothing about that felt like they would be tacky. Like, I know there are times when it'll be like, oh, and now this character is worthy and they can hold the hammer, or this character has Captain America's shield, and it doesn't feel earned. And
Mm.
this version of Storm, who at this point had lost her powers and was
Mhm.
still the big leader who had just fought with the heroes of Midgard in the Cert War, she feels worthy. This feels right, and I wish we could see more of Storm Thor.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Couldn't they have let her
missed
keep the
opportunity.
hammer for just a little bit? But it
Yeah,
was her
what if?
valor. Yeah. Yeah. Spoiler. But that was her fighting spirit and her, forging ahead with no powers, which had caught the eye of Loki because, Melody excluded, he has fairly good taste in women.
We
Slightly
dabble.
racist
Well,
in women, the way he describes.
sure.
There's some Asgardian culture, shock there.
Yeah, there's some rough stuff.
And we've talked before about how, Claremont loves to lean on villains falling in love with Storm. We just did the Dracula
Oh.
issue recently, where it's kind of like, oh, you're a vampire. Wait, oh, you slept it off. This this doesn't quite feel like that. It feels earned, and then again it factors into the choice that they need to make at the end of the issue. I agree, though, it would have been so cool if Mirage wasn't the only person that got to come out of this story transformed a little bit more, because I think it would have been an interesting era for Storm. But I think that's what makes this story so special, is we get this aspect of her character.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that she gives that up. Really, once she realizes
Mhm.
that she's been lied to, you see a bit of a struggle on her face, but she's going to make the right choice. And that's kind of the
Yes.
bedrock of Storm's character.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a great distillation of essentially Marvel Comics in the mid 80s, which I think for most people is one of the highlights of Marvel Comics as a company. There's just so much good stuff going on right now, and just these two epic, best of the best runs, Walt Simonson's Thor and Claremont's Uncanny X-Men, diving together into this beautiful amalgamation. It's something to be seen. It's such a iconic run. It's taking elements that really shouldn't work together and combining them in a way that makes sense for all the characters involved. And that's one of the strengths that Marvel Comics has that very few other mediums have in general. You can't do stories about, deep issues about racism and, how you fit into society in a grounded way. And then the very next issue jump into, and we're going to go to Asgard and fight some trolls, and it's going to be a fun time, and make it all work. That's what's bizarre to me.
Mhm.
None of this feels weird. None of this feels inorganic. It feels right to the characters and the universe. And I absolutely love that about it.
Yep.
Yeah, and if I could just expand on that for just a second, I think that if something like this were going to be played out editorially in 2017, it wouldn't be a pair of annuals because we don't really have that concept anymore. This would turn into some weird, like 12-part multi-artist crossover event, and I love that there's an era of Marvel Comics where stuff like this exists and was possible, and writers were able to play in other writers' sandboxes. Elizabeth, I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, what I was going to say plays right into what you said, is that what I love so much about this is you can tell that Chris Claremont is a real fan of Walter Simonson's Thor, because he gets so much of it right. And
Yeah.
he has really thought about how each character would relate to Asgard and the opportunities or challenges within. Like, magic becomes a bit more demonic, and Sunspot basically becomes Conan. He's just having a ball. And
Yeah.
it's really cool. I mean, poor Cypher, but he was always the one who got the short end of the stick. But seeing him and Warlock together, and spoiler, seeing Warlock turn into the Starship Enterprise was definitely a highlight.
Well,
Oh,
there's some great,
so many great Art Adams Warlock things in this. It's
and
awesome.
there's an awesome little crossover that plays up into the Thor story too, where near the end Carnilla sees all this and she's like, okay, no, I want to make sure that my champion's there. Like, it enhances the Carnilla and Balder story that you were getting in the Balder and Brave miniseries and all that in a very interesting way that I really enjoyed.
Except, and Miles pointed this out, this is a bit of an error, because Carnilla did not want Balder to become king. She wanted Balder to stay with her. So that was kind of an interesting that was the only little misstep. But I was so happy to see Carnilla and her amazing hats. I could totally just hand wave that away. Because she's about to be kidnapped and her head shaved. So
the only misstep that I was upset about is that Hela comes in and she's wearing her, antler Kirby crown that she doesn't wear in the Simonson run. And I was like, wait a minute, nope, I know the hat's here. I know what people are wearing. That's not the hat she had on.
Hey, that was the hat he wanted to draw, I guess.
Yeah.
What other hat would you want to draw?
It is the hat. If you're gonna draw a hat on Hela, you gotta go with the hat.
It's like
right?
Marvel Universe hats. It's Hela's hat, what's his name? Galactus's hat, and then I don't know. No one else. And then big gap right there.
There are lots of good Marvel hats.
It's Thor's hat,
Thor has a good hat too. It's just his hat is compact. It's nice and small in there. It works.
Yeah.
So we've talked at length about this story, and for good reason. But now it comes time to prove its worth on this list. I imagine it's going to go high.
Number 1.
Here's the thing.
I'm throwing down Mjolnir. I think it's number 1. It at the very lowest, it's got to be in the top 5, or I'm going to cry, because it's absolutely one of the best New Mutants X-Men stories ever to be written, and I will die on this hill because this is Galabru. This is really important to me.
Yeah, that's a whole big thing. So here's for people who haven't been paying attention at home. Our top 5 right now is Days of Future Past, God Loves Man Kills, Wolverine Volume 1, Worst X-Man Ever, and Messiah Complex. And I think there's a pretty sizable gap between Worst X-Man Ever and Frank Miller and Chris Claremont's Wolverine. To me, the floor, this is going to be in the top 4. I don't know where it ranks between Days of Future Past, God Loves Man Kills, and Wolverine. I would, if I'm throwing this out here, I think it's probably better than the Wolverine story.
Yep.
I don't think it's as good as God or as Days of Future Past, and I think God Loves Man Kills may be more of a quote unquote X-Men story than it. But that's
That's
my
a good
thought.
point.
Elizabeth, what's your take on this whole thing?
Yeah, I would waver between putting it at 3 or 4, like having Wolverine Volume 1 there simply because of its kind of cultural significance and the significance of like Wolverine in the history of as a character. But yeah, it definitely above worst X-Men ever. And yeah, I would waver between that and Wolverine Volume 1 as being number 3.
All right. So can y'all do me a solid and put it in at number 3? Because I don't need it at number 1. I can deal with that. I totally agree that Days of Future Past and God Loves Man Kills are absolute X-Men classics, Stone Cold classics. But I would love to see it in the
It's
top
very
3. That would
good.
make me a very happy X-Men
Like
fan.
here's the one downside of Asgard War. It's complicated as all get out. Like to
Yeah,
get the
that's
most
true.
of it, not only do you have to have a working knowledge of X-Men, you have to have a working knowledge of New Mutants, and at least have a good feel of what's going on in Simonson's Thor at the time. There's a lot playing into it.
Devil's advocate. I had none of that and I still
I
loved
mean,
it.
yes.
And I still do. So, but that I think you're bringing up a good point though, is that, I came into this as a complete novice. And now if you go and expand and you read what's around it, between New Mutants, X-Men, and Thor, this just enriches what this
Mm-hmm.
story can be. So it has some depth. So I know Zach, you're a big Wolverine mini fan. So where do you
I
put
think
this?
I agree. I think it is perfectly fine as our new number 3, Asgard War. X-Men New Mutants.
Woohoo!
Yes.
Congratulations, Asgardian Wars.
Oh, I'm so happy about this. You just made me very happy. Thanks, guys.
Well,
it's like Christmas came early.
it's getting there. But we have one other story, and hopefully this isn't too anticlimactic. But this is following up on Asgard War if they made a different choice. If the X-Men and New Mutants decided to stay. If they didn't go back to Midgard. This is What If, Volume 2, Number 12. What if the X-Men had stayed in Asgard? It is written and penciled by Jim Valentino, with inks by Sam De La Rosa and colors by Tom Vincent. This is crazy. This is a super weird story to me because the cover. Let's just start there. It's Storm Thor fighting Frog Thor.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I
Yep.
wanted in a comic book right there.
And I would also like to mention my other personal highlight is that Volstagg wears a Bjorn in this story, which I just think is
Did you
delightful.
not know that he
Yes,
does
he
that?
does.
That's a thing.
Does he do that normally in the Simonson run?
Well, yeah.
I got to go back.
Yep, the Surt sword, is that what you call it? Surtur's sword. Loki, of course, built some energy sucker to like get the energy from Surtur's sword to power up himself, and it made Volstagg's daughter Hildy ill and eventually all of Asgard. So he had to put her in a Bjorn and go out and figure it out.
And that's part of what he used to turn Thor into a frog.
Yes.
All right, so follow up Surtur question, because Surtur's sword gets broken later in this particular issue, but it gets broken by boulders. Yes. Is that like a thing that can happen to Surtur's sword? That's just straight up
from Simonson's Thor.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, they sheathe the sword in Simonson's, but yeah, if you can contain it, apparently it'll at least go dormant for a while.
Right.
I got to go back and read this. I feel a little bit unprepared here.
It's a very good run. So let's talk about what does happen, because not all the X-Men stay. Not all the X-Men decide to stay in Asgard. You get a handful of them, and we won't go through every single one, but there's some highlights of people who stay. I mean, Wolfsbane decides to stay with Hiramhari, and they have like baby wolf kids. Sunspot and Nightcrawler just decide to swashbuckle their way through Asgard, and it's great. Rogue falls in love with Fandral the Dashing, which, okay, that happens. Magic
Mhm.
becomes the Enchantress, which is cool. Like, there's a lot of fun stuff here. But what ends up happening is Hela, who was upset that she couldn't take Wolverine's life during the Asgardian War, she wants a soul. She is bound and determined to get it, and kind of turns into a giant war in Asgard.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty good distillation of what happens. I mean, she does take Sunspot.
Poor Sunspot. It's not a what if people don't die.
No more.
It's true. Yeah, this is. I'd read this a couple years ago, and I was struck by how much Chris Claremont was a fan of Walter Simonson's run. Like Jim Valentino really got this right in so many ways. Like both the Walter Simonson run and the Asgardian Wars. So for a what if, it's really well written.
Mhm.
It's really true to the characters. And even the art. Jim Valentino, yeah, you mentioned, also penciled it. And of course, he's not Art Adams, but he kind of evokes that feeling.
Yeah, he doesn't make this look like a book that would have came out directly in 1990 with one of the Image guys, like Jim Valentino. It has a very classic feel to it, and it's a lot of fun. Like for me, this was very fulfilling because it essentially takes the next chapter from Simonson's Thor and tells it if the X-Men characters were around. And it's so much fun to see that as a what if. Like, to me, this is what a what if should be. It makes me want to live in that universe. It makes me want to see, okay, if the comics actually did go that direction, this would still be awesome.
Yep.
Yeah. I also want to just touch on the fact that we've talked about what if before, and what if is always like these very dark end of the world scenarios. And I really like that this book does both. You can have it both ways with this one. Everybody, pretty much, with the exception of some characters, we mentioned Sunspot bites it, but most of the main characters have a happy ending in this story, which is very strange for a what if story. However, at the very last page, we still learn that Loki getting granted control of the 9 realms is going to throw them into a black hole.
Hold on. I think no, you read that wrong.
So
this is tying back to Alpha Flight, all the way back. All these things tie together. We thought this through, guys.
Right, because he does get those who sit above in shadow.
They give him his gift, but they specifically give him his gift at the end of the universe. So it's like, if you've read Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there is a location in it called the Restaurant at the End of the Universe, and it's not in a cardinal direction end of the universe. It's at the very last few hours of the universe. You get to sit there, have your dinner from a talking cow, and watch the world end. And it's just that. They just transported that.
So it was the worst possible ending for Loki.
So it is a happy ending.
Which is fine.
Right. But it's still a happy ending for everybody else.
Yeah,
it's
pretty
both.
much.
I love it.
It's like that rare episode of The Twilight Zone that's like not horribly depressing.
Yeah. The little child is not going to kill you with his mind.
Not going to bring
not right away.
World. No.
Oh.
Yeah. So I like this. I don't think it's essential by any stretch of the imagination, but for folks like, I think the three of us are all expressing that we're fans of these Asgard X-Men stories. This is a really nice little treat. Like I think Elisabeth noted, Valentino gets it right. He gets the Simonson stuff right. He gets the Claremont stuff right. And, his art is pretty solid throughout this book too. So where do we want to rank this? Because this one's a little bit tricky.
So here's the first barometer I think we want to use. We have already ranked a single what if story, which was what if Wolverine was Lord of the Vampires? Which I like. Have you read that, Elisabeth?
I have not read that, and now I must.
It's very good.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil for you what was really a life-changing moment as I read that book. So definitely check that out. And there's a reason that it ranks so high on our list. But I'm not going to.
I really. You're going to let. I hope it's in my Marvel Unlimited account.
not. I had to I had to
Yeah,
go
it's not on
long
unlimited.
box diving for it. But the moment I saw it, I was like,
I can
yes,
track it.
thank you. I will pay 25 cents for you.
Totally.
Definitely worth a quarter. Yeah, I don't think this is as
I
good
definitely don't.
as that. I don't even think it's in the same realm. I was looking
I
much
was
lower in
too.
the
I just wanted
list.
to make sure we were all on the same page. I don't think it's as good as the X-Men Alpha Flight because, frankly, Paul Smith is a better artist
No.
in these issues than Jim Valentino, who is also pretty darn good. Like,
Sure.
Yeah, he's doing a great job with the storytelling. I was looking lower around the Dracula Uncanny issue. I was going a little bit lower.
we have Uncanny X-Men 159, which is the one where Dracula is around and possesses Storm that we talked about earlier. That's between Wolverine Snicked and Astonishing Tales Mojo World.
Yeah, and we've been using Snicked as kind of like a barometer on this list a while because you and I both, realize that it's not essential, but we both really like it too.
I like Snicked a lot. I think I like Snicked better than this. I think
okay.
that's fair. Man, that's tough though below it.
That's kind of where I'm
Astonishing
looking
Tales
on
Mojo
that.
World, which is another Elizabeth, I won't be shocked if you haven't read this backup from Astonishing Tales in the mid 2000s. It's a Jonathan Hickman
It's another fun
written
one.
Mojo story, which is crazy.
Okay.
Yeah, it's about Bobby and
Sam, his best friend, Cannonball. We've talked about him a lot this episode.
Thank you. Yeah, jumping into Mojo to make movies for Mojo, and it's very fun. You should check it out.
So,
excellent.
I think I liked the Mojo World story better than that, but I think I enjoyed this story a lot more than Exiles 1 and 2. I feel like Exiles 1 and 2 is just where we get to the not so great section of the list. Like, I feel like that's the big drop off there. Because below that, you've got Fatal Attractions, some Lee Kirby X-Men that's just not far from the best Lee Kirby work out there. Yeah. I would say number 32. Any objections to that?
No.
Nope.
Awesome.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So, our new number 32 on the list. What if the X-Men stayed in Asgard? And that's it. That's 3 stories. This has been a super fun time. Now, Elizabeth, first off, we wanted to thank you for being on the show. It was a lot of fun, and your knowledge of the 9 realms really came in handy here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Now, if people want to check out the stuff you do, where can they do that at?
Oh, well, you can find me on Twitter at Elisabeth F, and that's Elizabeth with an S because my mom got creative. I also have I have a personal neglected blog at lisbert.wordpress.com. And then I'm also a part of Geek Craft Expo, which is a line of handmade geeky craft shows. And our next one is in Seattle this weekend, actually, at Hangar 30 in Magnuson Park. So if you are in Seattle and you want to skip Black Friday and come shop like 80 super cool like handmade geeky crafters, you should definitely do it. November 25th and 26th.
Awesome. That sounds great. If I was in Seattle, I would definitely think of attending that.
Yeah.
That's
very
cool.
cool.
So beyond that, this has been Battle of the Atom. Everything that happens on this show happens thanks to our generous patrons on Patreon. For $2 a month, you can toss in any story onto this list, and we will make sure to rank it. We actually just got a request in yesterday that I'm very excited for that we'll be doing on an upcoming episode. If you can't support the show monetarily, I get it. I can't support everything that I consume. But if you want to leave us a rating or review on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, whatever you use to just take in your podcasts into your ear holes, we'd appreciate that. That really helps us out. Beyond that, everything associated with Battle of the Atom can be found at XavierFiles.com, where I, Zach Jenkins, also have weekly X-Men articles. It's where we syndicate someone's webcomic that I'm sure he'll mention. And it's a lot of good stuff. If you want to follow on Twitter, you can follow me at XavierFiles, and you can hear me rant about X-Men stuff. Adam, where can people find you online?
Guys, you can always follow me at Arthur Stacy on Twitter, and my website is adamrec.tumblr.com. I am trying to put together at first, at least just a web downloadable PDF version of Bish and Jube's Age of Strife before the holidays. And with any luck, we may also be able to have a print on demand version, but that's a big question mark. So we'll see if we can get that going. Because I know there are people out there that would like a follow-up zine to the first one. So
Yeah,
fingers crossed. We'll see what happens.
You
But
can't
that's
send
what's
me one
going
of
on.
them and have me bag it and board it and then have me know there's a sequel out there that's just not printed out. I will just get a photocopier if I have to, but
All right. Well, we'll see what we can
that'd be
do.
great.
All right.
So again, Elizabeth, thank you for coming on. It was a blast to talk about
Thank
Thor
you
and
so
X-Men
much.
and all that good stuff.
Thank you. I had a great time.
Awesome. Well, this has been Battle of the Atom, and we hope you survive the experience.
Get